The widow stood in the dusty town square of Valentine, Nebraska, clutching the deed to her horse with trembling fingers as the auctioneer called for final bids on this hot August morning in 1882. Rose Zimmerman had already sold everything else. The furniture her late husband had built with his own hands, the china her mother had given her as a wedding gift, even the modest two-room house on the edge of town, where she had spent 3 short years of marriage before consumption took Thomas away. Now only Copper remained, the chestnut gelding with the white blaze down his face, and parting with him felt like severing the last thread connecting her to the life she had known. The sun beat down mercilessly on the gathered crowd, mostly men in dust-covered hats and weathered boots, who had come to see what scraps they might pick up from her misfortune. Rose felt their eyes on her, some pitying, others calculating, and she kept her gaze fixed on Copper's familiar form tied to the hitching post nearby. He nickered softly as if sensing her distress, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out that she had changed her mind, that she could not go through with this final sale. Going once at $40, the auctioneer droned, and Rose's heart sank. $40 would barely pay her debts to the general store and buy a train ticket back east to her sister's house in Pennsylvania, where she would spend the rest of her days as an unwanted burden, the pitied widow who had failed to make it in the territories. $100. A deep voice called from the back of the crowd, and heads turned in surprise. Rose looked up to see a tall man in his early 30s stepping forward, his broad-shouldered frame casting a long shadow across the packed dirt. He wore a clean shirt despite the heat, and his dark hair showed beneath a well-maintained hat. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with strong features and eyes the color of prairie grass that somehow found hers across the crowd. She recognized him vaguely as Hank Sullivan, the rancher who owned a substantial spread about 5 miles north of town. He rarely came into Valentine except for supplies, and she had never spoken more than a passing greeting to him. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to Mr. Sullivan for $100. The crowd dispersed quickly once the excitement ended, returning to their daily business. Rose remained rooted to the spot, watching as Hank Sullivan counted out the bills into the auctioneer's waiting hand. The money exchanged possession, the deed was signed over, and just like that, Copper belonged to someone else. She felt hollow inside, emptied out like a dried creek bed in summer. Hank approached Copper and ran a hand along the horse's neck, speaking to him in low, soothing tones. Then he turned and walked directly to where Rose stood, leading the gelding behind him. Up close, she could see the kindness in his face, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often despite the hard life of a cattleman. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "I believe this horse belongs to you." Rose stared at him in confusion. "No, sir, you just bought him fair and square. The sale is complete." "I bought him," Hank agreed, "but I am giving him back to you. A woman should not be without her horse, especially not in this country." The words struck her with such unexpected force that tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. "I do not understand. Why would you pay good money just to give him back?" Hank shifted his weight, looking suddenly uncomfortable with her direct question. "I knew your husband, madam." "Not well, but enough to know he was a good man. He helped pull one of my steers out of a ravine once, would not accept any payment for his trouble. Said neighbors looked out for each other. I figure this is me looking out for a neighbor." "But $100, Rose protested. "That is far more than the horse is worth, and certainly more than Thomas's kindness warranted." "The horse is worth what someone is willing to pay," Hank said simply. "And it seemed to me you needed someone to pay enough to settle your affairs and still have something left over." He pressed Copper's lead rope into her hands. There is a buyer's remorse clause in territorial law, little used but still valid. I am exercising it. The horse is yours again, and the money is yours to keep. Rose's mind reeled. That cannot possibly be legal. It is in special circumstances which I will argue this is. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. I know the territorial judge pretty well. He will side with me. Why? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me. Hank met her eyes steadily. Maybe I would like to remedy that situation if you would permit it. But regardless of your answer, the horse is yours. No strings attached, Mrs. Zimmerman. You have my word as a gentleman on that. Before she could formulate a response, he placed his hat back on his head, nodded politely, and walked away toward the general store. Rose stood frozen, holding Copper's lead rope in one hand and watching Hank Sullivan's retreating back with her heart pounding in a way it had not since before Thomas died. The horse nuzzled her shoulder, bringing her back to the present moment. She stroked his neck absently, her mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. She still had Copper, which meant she still had transportation and a means to work if she could find it. And she had $100, which was more money than she had seen in months. It was enough to keep her housed and fed while she figured out what to do next, enough to give her options beyond throwing herself on her sister's reluctant mercy. But more than the money or the horse, something else stirred in her chest. Someone had seen her in her moment of greatest need and helped her without expecting anything in return. Hank Sullivan had looked at her not with pity or calculation, but with simple human kindness, and perhaps something more in those green eyes. Rose gathered her courage and led Copper toward the general store. She found Hank inside, ordering supplies from Mr. Peterson behind the counter. She waited until he finished, her pulse racing with nervous energy. "Mr. Sullivan," she said as he turned to leave, his arms full of parcels. He paused, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "Mrs. Zimmerman, is everything all right with Copper?" "Everything is fine with him," she said quickly. "I wanted to thank you properly. What you did was extraordinarily generous, and I am not sure I can ever repay such kindness." "I told you, no repayment necessary." He shifted the parcels in his arms. "Though I meant what I said about getting to know you better, if that would be acceptable. Perhaps you would allow me to call on you." Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I have no home for you to call on, Mr. Sullivan. As of tomorrow, I have to vacate the house." His expression turned serious. "Where will you go?" "I was planning to take a room at the boarding house while I figure things out." She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Your generosity has bought me time, but I still need to find work and a more permanent situation." Hank set his parcels down on a nearby barrel, thinking, "Can you cook?" "Of course." "Can you manage household accounts, organize supplies, that sort of thing?" "I managed my own household," Rose said, puzzled by the questions. "I can do sums and keep records. My ranch has 20 hands during the busy season, fewer in winter. I have been managing with a cook who makes passable beans and terrible everything else. The bunkhouse is a disaster because the men have no one organizing cleaning rotations, and my own house is barely more than a place to sleep because I have no time to maintain it properly." He looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. "I need a housekeeper and cook. The job comes with a small cottage on the property, separate from the main house and bunkhouse. It has 2 rooms, a stove, and a good roof. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board." Rose's breath caught. $30 a month was generous for such work, more than fair. A place to live, meaningful work, and independence. But propriety reared its head, making her hesitate. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate the offer, but you must see how such an arrangement might appear to others. A widow living on a bachelor's ranch, working in his house. The cottage is a good 100 yards from the main house, Hank said. You would have complete privacy, and there are always ranch hands around during the day, so you would never be alone with me in a way that could compromise your reputation. Mrs. Chen in town does my laundry now. She could chaperone or vouch for the propriety of the arrangement if that would help. I genuinely need help, Mrs. Zimmerman. This is not charity disguised as employment. He sounded sincere, and Rose found herself wanting to believe him. More than that, she found herself wanting to say yes for reasons that had nothing to do with practicality. There was something about Hank Sullivan that drew her, a steadiness and quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time since Thomas had died. I would need to see the cottage first, she said carefully, and we would need to establish clear boundaries about our working arrangement. A slow smile spread across Hank's face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her stomach flutter. Of course. Would you like to ride out this afternoon? I can have you back in town before supper. Rose thought of the small room waiting for her at the boarding house, of the long, empty hours she would spend there wondering about her future. This afternoon would be fine. They arranged to meet at the livery stable in an hour, giving Rose time to collect her few remaining possessions from the house she was leaving behind. As she walked through the familiar rooms one last time, running her fingers along the walls Thomas had painted, she felt grief wash over her again. But mixed with the sorrow was something new, a tiny spark of anticipation for what might come next. She changed into her riding clothes, the practical split skirt and sturdy blouse she wore for long distances. Then she packed her carpetbag with her belongings: 3 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible, Thomas's pocket watch, and the small collection of letters from her family back east. Everything she owned in the world fit into one bag. The realization should have been depressing, but instead it felt almost liberating, as if she were shedding an old skin to reveal something new underneath. Hank was waiting at the livery with 2 horses saddled, Copper and his own large bay gelding. He had tied his supply parcels securely behind his saddle. When he saw her approaching with her carpetbag, he moved to help her secure it to Copper's saddle without being asked. "Thank you," Rose said as he checked the straps to make sure everything was secure. "Ready?" he asked, swinging easily into his own saddle. Rose mounted Copper, settling into the familiar saddle with practiced ease. "Ready." They rode out of Valentine heading north, following a well-worn trail that cut through the prairie grasslands. The August heat shimmered off the ground, but a steady breeze kept it from being unbearable. Rose had always loved riding, loved the freedom of moving across the open land with the sky stretching endlessly above. She and Thomas used to ride together on Sundays, exploring the countryside around their small property. Hank set an easy pace that allowed them to talk. "How long were you in Valentine?" he asked. 3 years. Thomas and I came out from Pennsylvania after we married. He wanted to try his hand at farming, thought he could make a go of it. Rose smiled sadly at the memory. He was better at dreaming than farming, but he tried so hard. The land just was not good enough, and we did not have the capital to improve it properly. "Farming is brutal out here," Hank agreed. "Ranching is not much easier, but at least cattle can move to where the grass is better. What will you tell your family about this new arrangement?" "That I have found respectable employment," Rose said. "My sister will disapprove regardless. She thought I was foolish to come west in the first place, and she made it clear that if I returned, I would be a burden she was prepared to bear but not happy about. That is a hard thing to say to family. Margaret has always been practical to the point of cruelty," Rose said. She means well, in her way. But I would rather make my own way than live under her roof and her judgment. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Rose found herself studying Hank from the corner of her eye. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. His hands on the reins were steady and sure, and he scanned the horizon constantly with the alertness of a man used to watching out for trouble. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked. 8 years. I came out from Missouri after my father died and left me a small inheritance. Bought the land cheap from a man who was giving up and heading back east, built it up slowly over time. He glanced at her. "It has been good to me, but it is a lot of work. I could use help, truly." "I was not just saying that to give you charity." "I believe you," Rose said, "and I appreciate your honesty." The land began to change as they rode, becoming more rolling with small hills and creek beds cutting through the grassland. Rose saw cattle in the distance, dark shapes moving slowly across the range. Then buildings appeared ahead. A main ranch house of solid timber construction, a large barn and corral, a bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. Everything looked well maintained but utilitarian, built for function rather than beauty. Hank led her past the main cluster of buildings to a small cottage set apart on a slight rise. It was simple but charming, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. He dismounted and helped her down, then opened the door to show her inside. The cottage had 2 rooms as promised. The main room contained a good iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, open shelving, and a comfortable-looking armchair by the window. The second room held a bed frame, a wardrobe, and a washstand. Everything was clean but clearly unused, the air inside stuffy from being closed up. "The previous owner's mother lived here," Hank explained. "But that was years ago, and it has mostly stood empty since I bought the place. I had some of the hands clean it out and make basic repairs last month, thinking I might try to hire someone to help with the cooking. I just had not gotten around to placing an advertisement." Rose walked through both rooms, examining everything with a critical eye. The stove looked to be in good working order. The furniture was simple but sturdy. There were hooks on the walls for hanging things, shelves for storage. The windows had good shutters and would let in plenty of light during the day. The bed frame was solid, though she would need a mattress and linens. "There is a root cellar accessed from outside," Hank continued, "and a good well about 50 feet from the house that you would share with the main house. The necessary is behind those trees for privacy." Rose turned to face him. "What exactly would my duties include?" "Cooking 3 meals a day for the ranch hands, breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at dusk. Keeping the bunkhouse in reasonable order, making sure supplies are stocked and laundry gets done on a schedule. I usually eat breakfast with the hands and pack something for dinner when I am working, but I take supper in the main house. I was hoping you might cook that as well and occasionally straighten up the main house, but I do not expect you to do a full cleaning. The hands can manage most of their own mess if someone is organizing them properly." "That is a lot of work for one person," Rose observed. "It is," Hank admitted, "which is why I am willing to pay well for it. If it proves too much, we can discuss hiring additional help. I want someone reliable and capable, not someone worked to death." Rose appreciated his pragmatism. "I would need a mattress and linens for the bed, and I will need access to supplies for cooking, including a budget for purchasing staples. We can go into town tomorrow for anything you need. I have accounts at the general store and with the butcher. You would have full authority to purchase what is necessary." He paused. "Should I take it you are considering the position?" Rose looked around the cottage again, imagining her things unpacked and arranged, imagining herself cooking at the stove and sitting in the armchair by the window with her mending. It would be a good life, a decent life. She would have work that mattered, a place of her own, and enough money to save for the future. And she would be near Hank Sullivan, this kind man who had already shown her more consideration than she had any right to expect. "I will take the position," she said, "on a trial basis for both of us. If after a month either of us feels the arrangement is not working, we can part ways with no hard feelings." Hank's face broke into a wide smile that made him look boyish despite his weathered features. "That is fair. When can you start?" "I suppose I already have," Rose said. "Given that all my belongings are already here, I might as well unpack and figure out what I need for tomorrow's meals." "I will ride back to town and get you a proper mattress and linens," Hank offered. "There is a spare tick and blanket in the bunkhouse you can use tonight if needed. And there is food in the main house kitchen that you are welcome to for supper." They spent the next hour going over practical details. Hank showed her the root cellar, well stocked with preserved vegetables and salted meat. He introduced her to the ranch hands who were working near the barn, 6 weathered men who looked at her with open curiosity but polite nods. He explained the daily routine of the ranch, when the men woke and when they expected meals. Then he rode back to town, leaving Rose alone in her new home. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe and placing her mother's Bible on the small shelf by the bed. Thomas's pocket watch she kept in her skirt pocket, a familiar weight against her hip. Then she walked to the main house to assess the kitchen situation. The main house was larger than she had expected, with a spacious front room, a separate bedroom, and a kitchen that was clearly the heart of the home. It was also a disaster. Dishes were piled in the wash basin. Food supplies were scattered across every surface with no organization, and everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. Rose felt her fingers itch to set things right. She started with the dishes, heating water on the stove and scrubbing everything clean. Then she organized the food supplies, discarding anything that had spoiled and arranging what remained in sensible groups. She found a good roast in the cold box and decided to make that for supper along with potatoes and whatever vegetables she could find in the root cellar. By the time Hank returned as the sun was setting, the kitchen was transformed. The air smelled of roasting meat and fresh bread, which Rose had made from starter she found in a crock. The table was set for 2, and Rose had cleaned herself up as best she could without a proper wash basin in the cottage. Hank stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene with obvious surprise. "You did not have to do all this today." "I needed to see what I had to work with for tomorrow," Rose said practically. "And you said you'd take supper in the main house, so I made enough for both of us, unless you would prefer to eat alone." "No," Hank said quickly. "No, I would be pleased to have company. I usually just make something quick and eat standing up. This is wonderful." He washed up at the pump outside, then joined her at the table. Rose had found good china in a cabinet, clearly unused for some time. She served the roast with potatoes and carrots from the root cellar, along with thick slices of warm bread. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Rose found herself nervous in a way she had not been since her first dinner with Thomas after their wedding. This felt strangely similar, sharing a meal with a man who was still mostly a stranger but who made her feel things she thought she would never feel again. "This is delicious," Hank said finally. "Best meal I have had in longer than I can remember. Thank you. I enjoy cooking when I have good ingredients to work with." Rose hesitated, then added, "Your kitchen was in quite a state." Hank had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know. I keep meaning to organize it, but by the time I finish work each day, I barely have energy to eat, let alone clean." "How long have you been managing alone?" 2 years. My last cook left to get married, and I never found a good replacement. Been making do with whoever I can hire temporarily, but no one has wanted to stay long term. He met her eyes across the table. I am hoping you will be different. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning beyond their surface intent. Rose felt her heart skip. I hope so too. After supper, Hank helped her carry the mattress and linens to the cottage. He had bought good quality, thick ticking filled with fresh straw and soft cotton sheets that must have cost more than was strictly necessary. Rose protested the expense, but he waved her off. A person cannot work well without good sleep, he said. Consider it part of your compensation. He helped her set up the bed, then lingered awkwardly by the door. If you need anything during the night, do not hesitate to come to the main house. I am a light sleeper. I will be fine, Rose assured him. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for everything. Hank, he said. If we are going to be living on the same property and sharing meals, you should call me Hank. Rose smiled. Then you should call me Rose. Rose, he repeated, and the way he said her name made warmth spread through her chest. Sleep well, Rose. I will see you at breakfast. After he left, Rose prepared for bed in her new home. She lay in the darkness listening to unfamiliar sounds, cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rustling through grass, an owl hooting somewhere nearby. It was different from town, wilder and more isolated, but she did not feel lonely. Instead, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if her life were beginning again after a long pause. She thought about Hank Sullivan, about the kindness he had shown her, and the way he looked at her with respect rather than pity. She thought about the way he moved, confident and capable, and the way his smile transformed his serious face. It was too soon to call what she felt anything more than gratitude and attraction, but she recognized the seeds of something deeper taking root in her heart. Thomas, she thought, reaching for his pocket watch on the bedside table and clutching it in the darkness. I hope you would understand. I hope you would want me to be happy again. The watch ticked steadily in her hand, a comforting rhythm that eventually lulled her to sleep. Rose woke before dawn, instantly alert in the unfamiliar room. For a moment she felt disoriented, but then memory returned and she smiled. She had a job, a home, a purpose again. She dressed quickly in the dim light of early morning and made her way to the main house kitchen. The ranch was already stirring. She could see lights in the bunkhouse and hear the low voices of men starting their day. She built up the fire in the stove and started breakfast. Flapjacks, bacon, eggs scrambled with wild onions she found in the root cellar, and strong coffee. By the time the hands started drifting toward the main house, drawn by the smell of food, she had everything ready. The men filed in looking surprised to see her there. One of them, a grizzled man of about 50 with kind eyes, introduced himself as Walter. Madam, we usually just grab whatever we can find and eat in the bunkhouse. You did not have to go to all this trouble. It is my job, Rose said simply. Please sit. There is plenty for everyone. They sat awkwardly at first, these rough men unused to having a woman serve them proper meals. But as they ate, Rose saw their expressions change to something like contentment. They had seconds, then thirds, cleaning every platter she set out. Hank arrived last, his hair still damp from washing. His eyes found Rose immediately, and something warm passed between them. He took a seat at the table and accepted the plate she prepared for him. Best breakfast we have had in 2 years, Walter announced to Hank. You made a good choice, boss. I know, Hank said, looking at Rose with unmistakable appreciation. After breakfast, the men headed out to their various tasks. Rose cleaned up the kitchen, then worked on organizing the pantry properly. She made lists of supplies they would need, planning meals for the next week based on what was available and what she would need to purchase in town. Hank found her in the kitchen around mid-morning. I need to ride into Valentine for a few things. Would you like to come along to pick up what you need for cooking?" Rose agreed readily. She was learning that Hank found excuses to be near her, and she did not mind at all. They rode into town together, and Rose tried not to notice how right it felt to be beside him, moving through the world as a unit. In Valentine, they visited the general store together. Mr. Peterson raised his eyebrows when he saw them, but said nothing, clearly recognizing that Rose's circumstances had changed dramatically since the auction just yesterday. Rose selected flour, sugar, spices, and various other staples while Hank arranged for everything to be delivered to the ranch. As they were leaving, they encountered Mrs. Chen, the laundress Hank had mentioned. She was a small woman of about 60 with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked between Rose and Hank with obvious interest. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "I heard you hired a housekeeper." "I did," Hank confirmed. "Rose, this is Mrs. Chen. She does laundry for most of the ranches around here. Mrs. Chen, this is Mrs. Rose Zimmerman. She will be managing my household from now on." Mrs. Chen studied Rose carefully. "You are the widow who was selling her possessions yesterday." "I am," Rose said, lifting her chin. She would not be ashamed of her circumstances. "And now you are working for Mr. Sullivan." It was not quite a question. "In a completely respectable arrangement," Hank said firmly. "Mrs. Zimmerman has her own cottage on the property, well separated from my house. Everything is proper and above reproach." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "Good. This town has too much gossip as it is." She turned to Rose. "If you need any help or advice, you come see me. A woman alone needs other women to lean on sometimes." "Thank you," Rose said, genuinely touched. "I appreciate that." As they walked back to the horses, Rose said quietly, "You were right about her vouching for the arrangement. That will help with gossip." "Mrs. Chen is respected in this community," Hank said. "And she is a good judge of character. If she approves of you, others will follow." They rode back to the ranch, and Rose spent the afternoon preparing dinner for the hands. She made a hearty stew with beef and vegetables, served with more fresh bread. The men ate enthusiastically, complimenting her cooking and clearly pleased with the dramatic improvement in their meals. Rose fell into a routine over the next few days. She woke before dawn, prepared breakfast for the hands, cleaned up, prepared dinner, cleaned up again, did various household tasks, then made supper. For the hands, she left dinner in pots they could serve themselves from, but she always made something special for Hank's supper and ate with him in the main house. Those suppers became the highlight of her days. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Hank told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the hard winters and droughts he had survived, about his hopes to expand the herd and improve the land. Rose told him about her life in Pennsylvania, about Thomas and their brief marriage, about the books she loved to read, and her secret dream of one day having a garden full of flowers instead of just practical vegetables. "Why did you never have children?" Hank asked one evening about a week after she had started working for him. Rose set down her fork, the question touching on old pain. "We tried. I had 2 miscarriages in 3 years. The second one was very bad. The doctor said I might not be able to carry a child to term." She looked down at her hands. "Thomas said it did not matter that I was enough for him, but I always wondered if he was disappointed." "I am sure he was not," Hank said gently. "From everything you have told me about him, he sounds like a man who knew what was important. What about you?" Rose asked. "Why did you never marry?" Hank was quiet for a moment. "I came close once back in Missouri, but she decided she did not want to move west and I could not stay there after my father died. Everything reminded me of him, of everything I had lost. I needed a fresh start." He paused. After that, I was too busy building the ranch, and honestly, I never met anyone who made me want to try again, until now." The words hung between them, and Rose felt her breath catch. "Hank, too soon?" he asked, searching her face. "I know it has only been a week, and I know you are still grieving your husband, but I would be lying if I said I did not feel something for you, Rose. From the moment I saw you standing in that town square, looking so brave even though your world was falling apart, I felt it." Rose's heart pounded. "I feel it too," she admitted. "But Hank, Thomas has only been gone 6 months. People would say it is too soon, that I am being disrespectful to his memory." "What do you think?" Hank asked. "Not what people would say, but what you actually think." Rose considered the question carefully. "I think Thomas would want me to be happy. I think he would be glad I found someone kind and good to care about. But I also think I need time to be sure what I feel is real and not just gratitude or loneliness." "That is fair," Hank said. "I can wait, Rose. I am a patient man. I just wanted you to know how I feel, so you would not wonder." They continued their routine, but something had shifted between them. Rose found herself watching Hank more openly now, admiring the way he handled the horses with gentle firmness, the way he treated his ranch hands with respect, the way his face lit up when he saw her each morning. She saw him watching her too, his eyes following her movements as she worked, lingering on her face when she smiled or laughed. The ranch hands noticed, of course. Walter mentioned to Rose one afternoon while she was organizing the bunkhouse that he had never seen the boss so happy. "He is a good man," Walter said. "Deserves happiness after all the hard work he has put into this place, and you seem like a good woman if you do not mind me saying so." "I do not mind," Rose said, "and thank you. Just be patient with him," Walter continued. "He acts tough, but he feels things deeply. When he cares about something or someone, he cares all the way." Rose thought about that conversation as she prepared supper that evening. She made Hank's favorite, pot roast with potatoes and carrots and a dried apple pie for dessert. When he came in from work, dirty and tired, his face still brightened when he saw her. "Something smells amazing," he said. "Go wash up," Rose said with mock sternness. "Supper will be ready in 10 minutes." Over the meal, Hank told her about a problem he was having with some cattle that had gotten through a broken fence. "I need to ride out tomorrow to fix it and round them up. Will probably take most of the day." "Be careful," Rose said without thinking, then felt herself blush at how wifely it sounded. Hank smiled. "I will, though I like knowing you care if I am careful or not." "Of course I care," Rose said. "You are my employer. If something happens to you, I am out of a job." "Is that the only reason?" Hank asked, his eyes teasing but with a serious undertone. Rose met his gaze steadily. "No, that is not the only reason." Hank reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her on and off her horse or handing her supplies. His palm was calloused from work but warm and gentle. "Rose, I know you need time, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. It is not just about needing a housekeeper or being lonely. You are funny and smart and capable, and being near you makes everything better. I am falling in love with you, and I cannot pretend otherwise." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It scares me how much I feel for you after such a short time. It took Thomas and me months to reach this point, and we were courting properly the whole time." "Maybe when something is right, you just know," Hank said. "Or maybe what we are feeling is just the beginning and we need to see where it goes. Either way, I want to see this through if you do." "I do," Rose said. "But slowly, Hank. I need to do this right for my own peace of mind if nothing else." "Slowly," Hank agreed. "Though I reserve the right to hold your hand at supper sometimes." Rose laughed, the sound surprising them both. She realized she had not laughed like that, free and genuine, since before Thomas got sick. Hand-holding at supper is acceptable. They finished their meal with hands linked across the table, talking about inconsequential things, but feeling the weight of what had just passed between them. When Rose returned to her cottage that night, she felt like she was floating. She lay in bed touching her lips, imagining what it would be like when Hank finally kissed her, because she knew now that they would. The next day, Hank rode out early with 3 of the hands to deal with the fence and the stray cattle. Rose found herself watching the horizon anxiously, starting every time she thought she heard horses approaching. She told herself she was being silly, that Hank did this kind of work every day and was perfectly capable of taking care of himself. But the worry persisted. She threw herself into work to distract herself, deep cleaning the main house from top to bottom. She discovered that Hank had very few personal possessions. Some books, a collection of newspapers, a framed photograph of what must be his parents. Everything was practical and utilitarian, chosen for function rather than beauty or sentiment. It made her heart ache for him, for the loneliness that must have filled this house before she came. She was beating the dust out of the parlor rug when she heard horses approaching in late afternoon. She rushed outside to see Hank and the hands returning, everyone looking tired and dusty but unharmed. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she felt weak with it. Hank saw her waiting and separated from the group, riding directly to where she stood. "Everything all right?" he asked, concerned by something he must have seen in her face. "Yes," Rose said quickly. "I was just worried. You were gone longer than I expected." Something pleased and tender crossed his expression. "The fence damage was worse than I thought, took longer to repair. But we got it done and brought the cattle back." He dismounted and stood close to her, close enough that she could smell horse and sweat and something that was uniquely him. "Were you really worried about me?" "Yes," Rose admitted. "More than I should have been for someone I have known less than 2 weeks." Hank smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I like knowing you worry about me, and for what it is worth, I thought about you all day. Kept wondering what you were doing, if you were all right here alone." "I kept myself busy," Rose said, hyper-aware of his hand still touching her face. "I cleaned the entire house." "You did not have to do that. I wanted to. It is a good house, Hank. It deserves to be cared for properly." "So do you," Hank said softly, "and I mean to care for you properly if you will let me." Rose leaned into his touch, her heart full. "I am letting you." They stood like that for a long moment, the rest of the world fading away. Then Hank stepped back reluctantly. "I should get cleaned up for supper." "It will be ready in an hour," Rose said. Over the following weeks, Rose and Hank grew closer gradually, building their relationship on a foundation of daily shared moments and honest conversation. Hank brought her small gifts: wildflowers picked on his rides across the range, a book of poetry from the general store, a finely crafted wooden box for her trinkets that he admitted sheepishly he had made himself in the evenings. Rose reciprocated in her own way, learning his preferences and tailoring her cooking to please him. She mended his clothes without being asked, organized his papers, and left small touches of beauty around the house. A jar of flowers on the kitchen table, curtains she sewed from fabric she purchased in town, a new tablecloth for their suppers. The ranch hands watched this courtship with approval and occasional teasing. Walter told Hank within Rose's hearing that he had better marry her before some other man snatched her up, and Hank had responded seriously that he was working on it. One evening in late September, after Rose had been at the ranch for 6 weeks, Hank asked her to take a walk with him after supper. They strolled away from the buildings toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch and the prairie beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "I love this view," Hank said. "It is why I built the house where I did. Every evening when I come home, I can see this." "It is beautiful," Rose agreed, standing close beside him. "Rose," Hank said, turning to face her. "I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I think we have been doing that, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Rose's heart began to pound. "All right. Do you think you could be happy here? Not just as my housekeeper, but as my wife. Building a life with me, making this ranch a real home, maybe having children if we are blessed with them." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Rose. I know it has not been very long, but I am sure. You are what has been missing from my life, and I do not want to waste any more time without you." Rose felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I could be happy here. I am happy here. And I love you too, Hank. I never thought I would feel this way again, but I do. You have given me back hope and purpose and joy." Hank pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Will you marry me then? Make this official. Let me take care of you for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Rose said again, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Hank kissed her then, his lips gentle but sure against hers. Rose melted into the kiss, into the solid warmth of his body, into the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Hank rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "Every day for the rest of our lives, I will work to make you happy." "You already do," Rose whispered. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Valentine. Mrs. Chen stood up as Rose's witness, and Walter stood up for Hank. The whole town seemed to turn out, curious about the widow who had nearly lost everything and the rancher who had given her a second chance. If anyone thought the courtship had been too quick or improper, they kept it to themselves in the face of the obvious love between the bride and groom. Rose wore a new dress for the occasion, pale blue cotton that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew. Hank wore a new suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shaved smooth. When he saw Rose walking toward him down the church aisle, his face transformed with such joy that several women in the congregation teared up. The minister kept the service short and simple. When he pronounced them man and wife and Hank kissed her, Rose felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This was different from her wedding to Thomas, different but no less meaningful. She had loved Thomas, but theirs had been a young love, full of dreams and innocence. What she felt for Hank was deeper, tempered by loss and hardship, and a clear-eyed understanding of what marriage truly meant. The townspeople had organized a small reception at the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Rose danced with Hank, with Walter, with several other ranch hands who had come to celebrate. She accepted congratulations from people she barely knew, feeling welcomed into the community in a way she had never quite managed during her first marriage. As the evening wore on, Hank leaned close and whispered, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Sullivan?" Rose smiled at her new name. "Yes, I am ready." They rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, taking their time and enjoying the quiet intimacy. When they arrived, Hank helped Rose down from her horse and then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" Rose asked, laughing. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Hank said. "It is tradition." "The cottage is not our home anymore," Rose pointed out. "Or are you planning to carry me over 2 thresholds? The cottage was always temporary," Hank said. "The main house is ours now, our home." He carried her to the main house, which now looked truly lived in and welcoming with Rose's touches throughout. He set her down gently inside the door and then kissed her with building passion. Rose kissed him back, no longer holding anything in reserve, giving herself fully to this man she had chosen and who had chosen her. That night marked the true beginning of their married life together. Hank was gentle and patient, making sure Rose felt cherished and safe. Rose discovered that love could be both tender and passionate, that she could want and be wanted with an intensity that surprised her. They learned each other slowly, exploring and discovering, building new memories to replace the ones they had lost. In the morning, Rose woke in Hank's arms, sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. She watched him sleep for a moment, this good man who had saved her from despair and given her love beyond measure. When his eyes opened and he smiled at her, she knew she had made the right choice. "Good morning, wife," he murmured, pulling her closer. "Good morning, husband," Rose replied, and the words felt like coming home. Their married life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rose continued managing the household and cooking for the ranch hands, but now she did it as mistress of the house rather than hired help. The hands adjusted quickly to the change, treating her with the respect due to the boss's wife while maintaining the easy friendliness they had established. Rose transformed the main house over the following months, making it truly their home. She sewed new curtains for every window, bright, cheerful fabrics that let in light while providing privacy. She planted flowers around the house, daffodils and roses and wildflowers she transplanted from the prairie. She organized Hank's books properly and added her own, creating a small library in the parlor. Hank watched these changes with pleasure, frequently telling her how much more the house felt like a home now. He brought her things from town without her asking: fabric for sewing, seeds for her garden, a rocking chair he thought she would like. They worked together on improving the ranch, Rose managing the finances and supplies while Hank handled the cattle and land. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in November. Rose had never experienced a plains winter and was unprepared for the harsh cold and fierce winds. But Hank made sure the house was sealed tight and the wood stove kept burning. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading together or simply talking, building their knowledge of each other day by day. It was during one of those long winter evenings that Rose realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had been afraid to hope given her history. Finally, she told Hank over supper one night in early December. "I think I am carrying a child," she said quietly. Hank froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I think so." Hank set down his fork and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands. "How do you feel about it, given what happened before?" Rose appreciated that he thought of her fears first rather than just celebrating. "I am scared," she admitted. "Terrified, actually. But also hopeful. Maybe things will be different this time." "They will be different," Hank said firmly, "because I am going to make sure you have the best care possible. We will get the doctor out here to examine you, and he will come as often as needed. You will not lift anything heavy or overtire yourself, and whatever happens, we will face it together." "You really want this?" Rose asked, searching his face. "I want you," Hank said. "Healthy and safe. If we are blessed with a child, that will be wonderful. But you are what matters most to me, Rose, always." Rose kissed him, her fears eased by his steadiness. "I love you." "I love you too," Hank said. "And I am going to take such good care of you both." Hank was true to his word. He brought the doctor out from Valentine the very next week, despite the difficult traveling conditions. Dr. Morrison examined Rose thoroughly and confirmed that she was indeed about 3 months along. "Given your history," he said seriously, "you need to be very careful. Plenty of rest, no heavy lifting, good nutrition, and at the first sign of any problems, send for me immediately." "I will make sure she follows your instructions," Hank promised. The pregnancy progressed slowly through the winter. Rose had some difficult days with sickness and fatigue, but overall she felt stronger than she had during her previous pregnancies. Hank treated her like fragile glass, constantly fussing over her until Rose had to tell him firmly that she was pregnant, not dying. "I need to keep working," she insisted. "Gentle work, but I need to feel useful." They compromised. Rose continued cooking and light housework, but Hank hired a woman from town to come twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry. The ranch hands stepped up to help too, taking over any tasks that seemed too strenuous. As her belly grew and spring returned to the prairie, Rose felt hope building inside her along with the child. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe she and Hank would be blessed with the family they both wanted. In early April, Rose went into labor. Hank sent one of the hands racing to town for Dr. Morrison and then stayed by Rose's side, refusing to be banished from the room despite tradition. He held her hand through the contractions, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, and whispered encouragement when she was convinced she could not continue. "You can do this," he told her. "You are the strongest person I know. Just a little more, Rose, just a little more." After hours of labor as the sun was setting, Rose gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment she heard his strong, angry cry, she burst into tears of relief and joy. Hank was crying too, his face wet as the doctor placed the squalling infant in Rose's arms. "You did it," Hank said in wonder. "Rose, you did it. He is perfect." The baby was indeed perfect, with a full head of dark hair and tiny fists that waved angrily at the world. Rose counted his fingers and toes, examined every inch of him, unable to believe he was real and here and alive. "What should we name him?" she asked Hank. Hank touched the baby's tiny hand reverently. "What do you think of Thomas? After your first husband," Rose looked up at him with fresh tears. "You would do that. He was part of your life, part of making you who you are," Hank said simply. "I do not mind honoring his memory. And maybe his middle name could be Michael, after my father." "Thomas Michael Sullivan," Rose said, testing the name. "I like it." Little Tommy, as they quickly began calling him, transformed their lives. Rose had worried she would not know how to be a mother after so much loss, but instinct and love guided her. She nursed him, rocked him, sang him lullabies her own mother had sung to her. Hank was an involved father from the start, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floors with Tommy when he cried at night, and gazing at his son with unconcealed adoration. The ranch hands took to calling by to see the baby, these rough men becoming surprisingly gentle as they held the tiny bundle. Walter declared himself honorary grandfather and carved Tommy a set of wooden blocks. Even Mrs. Chen came out from town, bringing tiny clothes she had sewn and offering advice on caring for an infant. As Tommy grew from a newborn to an infant and then a curious toddler, Rose and Hank's love deepened further. They had been forged in the fires of loss and hardship, and their relationship had a strength that came from truly knowing and choosing each other. They worked together seamlessly, partners in every sense of the word. When Tommy was 2, Rose found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she was less afraid. She gave birth in late winter to a daughter they named Alina after Hank's mother, with Rose as her middle name. Alina was tiny and delicate where Tommy had been robust, with pale hair and serious eyes that seemed to take in everything. The ranch prospered as their family grew. Hank expanded the herd and improved the land. Rose managed the household and finances with skill, turning the ranch into a successful enterprise. They added on to the house, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Rose's flower garden grew each year until it was the envy of the county. 2 years after Alina, Rose gave birth to twin boys, James and John, who were holy terrors from the moment they could crawl. The house was always full of noise and laughter, and the chaos of children. Rose sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands of 4 small children, but Hank was always there to help, never considering childcare beneath him or solely her responsibility. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Hank gave Rose a beautiful mare with a gentle temperament. "So you can ride with me again," he said. "Like we used to before the children. Your mother can watch them for a few hours on Sundays." Rose had begun to think she would never have time for herself again, and the gift touched her deeply. They began taking Sunday afternoon rides together, just the two of them, reconnecting as husband and wife apart from their roles as parents. Those rides became sacred time, when they talked about everything or nothing, remembered who they were together, and reinforced the foundation of their marriage. As the years passed, their children grew. Tommy became a serious boy who loved learning and books, spending hours reading in the corner while his siblings played. Alina was quiet but determined, helping her mother in the garden and learning to sew and cook. The twins were adventurous and mischievous, constantly getting into trouble but impossible to stay angry with because of their infectious joy. Rose sometimes marveled at how different her life was from what she had imagined that terrible day when she stood in Valentine's town square preparing to sell her last possession. She had thought her life was ending, that she would never be happy again. Instead, she had found Hank, and he had given her not just security or comfort, but genuine love and a family beyond her wildest dreams. "You ever regret it?" she asked Hank one evening after the children were in bed. They were sitting on their porch watching the sunset, as had become their habit on warm evenings. "Buying copper that day and binding yourself to a widow with nothing." Hank pulled her closer against his side. "Regret it? Rose, that was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything that matters: love, family, purpose beyond just working. This house was just a building before you. Now it is a home full of life and laughter." "I feel the same way," Rose said. "You saved me, Hank, not just practically but in every way that matters. You gave me a reason to keep living when I wanted to give up." "We saved each other," Hank corrected. "I was just going through the motions before you, Rose, working and sleeping and working some more but never really living. You taught me how to live again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Rose thought about all the moments that had led to this one. Her decision to come west with Thomas, his death, her desperate auction, Hank's act of kindness. Each moment had been necessary to bring them to this place, this life they had built together. "I hope our children remember this," Rose said quietly. "The happiness, the love. I want them to know that even when life seems impossible, there can be joy on the other side of grief." "They will remember," Hank assured her, "because we will show them every single day." As their 10th wedding anniversary approached, Rose and Hank began planning a celebration. The children were older now, Tommy nearly 11, Alina 8, and the twins 6. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful in the region. They employed over 30 hands during busy seasons and had built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Rose had also become known in her own right, not just as Hank Sullivan's wife, but as a skilled manager and wise counselor. Women from neighboring ranches and farms sought her advice on everything from managing household budgets to dealing with difficult neighbors. She had become a pillar of the small community that had once viewed her as a desperate widow. For their anniversary, They threw a large party at the ranch, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. Mrs. Chen came, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack. Walter was there, retired now but still living in a small cottage on the ranch property because he considered the Sullivans his family. Neighbors came from miles around, and the celebration lasted well into the night. As Rose looked around at the gathered crowd, at her children playing with other ranch children, at Hank laughing with their friends, she felt overwhelming gratitude. This was her life now, full and rich and overflowing with love. She had lost so much, but she had also gained more than she ever thought possible. Late in the evening, Hank found her standing alone for a moment, watching the festivities. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy anniversary, my love," he murmured. "Happy anniversary," Rose replied, leaning back against him. "Thank you for 10 wonderful years." "Here is to 50 more," Hank said. "At least." Rose turned in his arms to face him. "Do you remember that first day when you bought copper?" "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Hank said. "Standing there trying not to cry while your world fell apart, and I remember knowing, even then, that I wanted to be the one to help you put it back together." "Did you really know, even then?" Rose asked. "Maybe not consciously," Hank admitted, "but something in me recognized something in you, like I had been waiting for you without knowing it." "I used to feel guilty," Rose confessed, "about loving you so soon after Thomas died, about being so happy when I thought I would never be happy again." "And now?" Hank asked gently. "Now I think life is too short and too unpredictable to waste time feeling guilty about joy," Rose said. "Thomas would have wanted me to be happy, and you have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible." Hank kissed her then in front of everyone, a long, deep kiss that made several people whistle and cheer. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "I love you, Rose Sullivan," Hank said. "I love you, Hank Sullivan," Rose replied. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and challenges as all lives do. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and injured hands, financial pressures and family illnesses. But through it all, Rose and Hank faced everything together, their love a constant foundation that never wavered. Tommy grew into a thoughtful young man who surprised everyone by wanting to become a teacher rather than a rancher. Hank supported his son's choice without hesitation, proud that the boy knew his own mind. Alina became a skilled horsewoman and eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, staying close to home and starting her own family. The twins remained inseparable, eventually taking over the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Hank slowed down in his 50s. Rose and Hank grew older together gracefully, silver threading through their hair and lines marking their faces. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with time, deepened by decades of shared experience and mutual respect. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Rose looked around the crowded house, now expanded several times to accommodate their growing family, and marveled again at the life she had built from the ashes of her first marriage. Hank found her in the kitchen, sneaking a moment of quiet amid the chaos. He wrapped his arms around her just as he had 30 years before, and Rose melted into his familiar embrace. "No regrets?" he asked, repeating their old conversation. "Not a single one," Rose replied honestly. "You gave me everything, Hank. Love, family, purpose, joy. You gave me a life worth living." "You did the same for me," Hank said. "That day in Valentine when I saw you selling copper, I was not really living either, just existing. You taught me what it meant to truly be alive, to love and be loved, to build something meaningful." "We built it together," Rose said. "Yes," Hank agreed. Together. They stood like that for a long moment, surrounded by the sounds of their family but cocooned in their own private world. Then one of their grandchildren called for them, and they returned to the celebration hand in hand, still as connected as they had been on their wedding day. As the sun set on their 30th anniversary, Rose reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From that desperate widow in the town square to this, a woman surrounded by love, fulfilled in every way that mattered. She had learned that grief did not preclude joy, that loss did not mean the end of happiness, that life could surprise you with second chances when you least expected them. Hank had not just bought her horse that day in Valentine. He had bought her hope, given her love, and helped her build a life beyond her wildest dreams. And she had done the same for him, transforming his house into a home and his solitary existence into a life rich with family and purpose. Years later, when Rose and Hank were in their 70s, they still took their Sunday afternoon rides together when weather permitted. They moved more slowly now, their bodies marked by decades of hard work and life. But their connection remained as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered so much together. One such afternoon, as they sat on their favorite rise overlooking the ranch, Rose said thoughtfully, "You know what I think about sometimes? That auctioneer in Valentine, calling for bids on copper. If you had not been there that day, if you had not made that extraordinary gesture, my entire life would have been different. Or maybe we would have found each other another way," Hank suggested. "I like to think some things are meant to be." "Maybe," Rose agreed. "But I am grateful it happened the way it did, that you saw me in my worst moment and still chose to help me, to love me." "You made it easy to love you," Hank said simply. "You still do every single day." They sat together watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch spread out below them, now run primarily by their sons but still bearing the mark of everything Rose and Hank had built together. Grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. It was a good life, a full life, a life worth celebrating. As the sky turned gold and crimson, Hank took Rose's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. They did not need words anymore to communicate love. It flowed between them as naturally as breathing. Rose thought back to that desperate woman standing in Valentine's town square, preparing to sell her last possession and give up on her dreams. She wished she could tell that woman not to despair, that an extraordinary act of kindness was about to change everything, that she would find love again, deeper and richer than before, that she would build a family and a life beyond anything she had imagined. But perhaps that woman had known, somewhere deep inside. Perhaps that was why she had found the courage to accept Hank's help, to take a chance on something new, to open her heart to love again despite her grief and fear. "What are you thinking about?" Hank asked, reading her contemplative expression. "Everything," Rose said. "The whole journey from then to now, how grateful I am for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here." "To me?" Hank asked with a slight smile. "To us," Rose corrected. "To this life we built together." Hank lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Best investment I ever made, buying that horse." Rose laughed, the sound still bright despite her years. "Best sale I ever made, letting you buy him." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of fire and shadow. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, they remained there together. Two souls who had found each other in the midst of loss and built something beautiful from shared determination and love. Eventually they rode back to the house, where lights glowed warmly in the windows and family waited inside. Rose prepared supper with Alina's help while Hank sat with his sons and grandsons, discussing ranch business and telling stories from the old days. The house was full of noise and warmth and life, exactly as Rose had always dreamed it could be. That night, lying in bed beside Hank in the room they had shared for over 30 years, Rose felt profound contentment. Her life had not been easy, had not gone according to her initial plans. She had known loss and grief and desperation, but she had also known great love, twice blessed with good men who had cherished her. She had raised children, built a home, made a difference in her community. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. Hank, not quite asleep, stirred beside her. "For what?" "For seeing me that day. For choosing to help me when you could have just walked away. For loving me so well for so long." Hank pulled her close, tucking her against his side in their familiar sleeping position. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for making every day an adventure." "I love you," Rose said. "I love you too," Hank replied. "Always have, always will." They drifted off to sleep together, as they had done for over 3 decades, secure in their love and the life they had created. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, wild and beautiful and full of possibility. Just like the love story that had begun on a desperate day in Valentine, Nebraska, when a rancher bought more than just a horse. He bought a future, a family, and a love that would last a lifetime. In the years that followed, Rose and Hank remained partners in every sense until the very end. They grew old together gracefully, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under their son's management, a testament to everything Rose and Hank had built. When they finally passed, within months of each other, as if neither could bear to be long without the other, they were buried on that rise they had loved, overlooking the ranch that had been the foundation of their life together. Their gravestone bore simple words: Rose and Hank Sullivan. Together they built a life of love. Their story became legend in the small community, passed down through generations as an example of how kindness and love could transform lives. The tale of the widow who was selling her last possession, and the rancher who bought it and gave her priceless love, became a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope can appear in unexpected forms. The ranch remained in the Sullivan family for generations, each one adding to the legacy Rose and Hank had begun. And in the house that Rose had transformed from a bachelor's dwelling into a warm family home, her great-great-grandchildren played in rooms that still echoed with the love of that original couple who had found each other against all odds. Their love story had started with an act of extraordinary generosity on a dusty August day in 1882. It had grown through mutual respect, shared hardship, and unwavering commitment. And it had created a legacy that extended far beyond their own lives, touching everyone who heard their story and reminding the world that love could indeed conquer all, that second chances were possible, and that sometimes the end of one chapter was really just the beginning of something even more beautiful. Rose and Hank Sullivan had loved deeply, lived fully, and left the world better than they found it. Their story was not just about romance, though there was plenty of that. It was about partnership, resilience, family, and the transforming power of genuine love. It was about two people who had both known loss finding each other, and choosing to build something new and wonderful together. And it all began with a simple act of kindness in a small Nebraska town, when a rancher saw beyond a desperate widow's circumstances to the remarkable woman beneath. When he bought not just a horse but a future, and in doing so, gave both of them a love that would echo through generations, timeless and true and absolutely priceless.